father and daughter, an experienced climber and his young apprentice, vanish into the heart of the unforgiving Wyoming mountains. For 11 years, their disappearance remains a cold case, a ghost story whispered around campfires. But what if the wilderness held a secret so horrifying it would reopen the investigation, and a single sleeping bag on a remote cliff face would finally reveal the truth? Hello, everyone. Before we dive into this incredible and haunting story, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you more of these stories. Now, let's go back to a Tuesday in late August 2013, when silence began to creep into a family's life. A silence that would ultimately become a terrifying, decade-long mystery. The coffee Marianne Beckwith had made sat on the kitchen counter, untouched and growing cold. The clock on the wall seemed to tick with a deafening rhythm, each second a painful reminder of the time that was passing. At 7 p.m., she was supposed to get a call from her husband, Garrett. He and their 19-year-old daughter, Della, were on a climbing expedition to Mount Hooker. It was a trip they had planned for months, a journey of a lifetime for a father and his adventurous daughter. Garrett, a man who lived by systems and checklists, had promised he would call. He was a meticulous planner, a man who believed every contingency could be foreseen. Miss Check-in was not part of his plan, and with every passing minute, a knot of fear tightened in Marianne's stomach. She tried to rationalize it. Dead battery, a difficult climb that took longer than expected. Mount Hooker was no ordinary mountain. It was a formidable beast of granite and ice that didn't adhere to human schedules. But as the minutes turned into hours and the house, once so full of life and laughter, felt too large and empty, Marianne's anxiety grew. By Wednesday, the gnawing worry had turned into a cold, hard certainty. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. She held her phone, rereading Della's last message sent 4 days earlier. Starting the approach, "See you in a few days. Love you." The words, once a source of comfort, now felt like a ghostly whisper from a world that had suddenly gone silent. The man who had once been described as the safest climber by his own partner, a man who checked his knots 3 times, was now 2 days overdue with no word. It was a violation of his own rigid code, a catastrophic failure of the one thing he prized above all else: safety. Marianne, her hands trembling, finally dialed the number for the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. Her voice, tight with a control that was more alarming than outright panic, conveyed the gravity of the situation. She described her husband and daughter, their intended route, and Garrett's unwavering commitment to safety. For the dispatcher, this was a familiar call, but the mention of Mount Hooker and a 2-day silence from an experienced climber elevated the case. This wasn't a lost tourist. This was a higher-risk situation, and the search for Garrett and Della Beckwith had officially begun. The drive to the Big Sandy trailhead was a long, rattling journey into true isolation. Deputy Miles Corbin of the Fremont County Sheriff's Office felt the last vestiges of civilization fall away with every mile. The pristine blue sky of Lander gave way to a wider, more imposing canopy. Framed by the jagged teeth of the Wind River Range, he had been on calls like this before. But this one felt different, a sense of foreboding that settled deep in his gut. Marianne Beckwith's strained voice on the phone had haunted him. Her description of her husband as a man for whom getting lost was a logical impossibility. As his tires crunched over the gravel of the parking lot, he spotted at a dark green Ford F-150. Its color muted by a thick film of dust and pine pollen. It matched the description. The truck sat silently, looking as if it had been abandoned for weeks. He ran the plate. It came back to Garrett Beckwith. Corbin began his routine inspection. The cab was tidy, almost Spartan. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest a frantic departure. It was perfectly, unnervingly normal. He tried the door handle. It was unlocked. He opened the door and leaned in, the faint scent of stale coffee and pine air freshener hitting him. His eyes scanned the dash, the center console, and then moved to the glove compartment. He popped it open, and there they were, nestled between the vehicle's registration and the owner's manual. 2 sleek black devices, satellite phones. For a surreal moment, the significance didn't register. Then a cold wave of shock washed over him. These were their lifelines, the only piece of technology that worked in the heart of this unforgiving wilderness. For a man described as a safety fanatic, a meticulous planner undertaking one of the most serious climbs of his life, leaving them behind was unthinkable. It wasn't just an oversight. It was a catastrophic error, a decision so fundamentally at odds with the man Marianne had described that it threw the entire narrative into chaos. Corbin picked one up. The screen lit up instantly, displaying a full battery. The other was the same. They hadn't been forgotten because they were dead. They had simply been left behind. The prevailing theory of a simple climbing accident, a fall, an injury, now seemed insufficient. This was something else entirely, a mystery that began not on the treacherous slopes of Mount Hooker, but right here in the quiet, dusty cab of this truck. Within hours, the trailhead transformed into a bustling command post. Search and rescue vehicles rolled in, maps were spread across the hoods of pickups, and the immense topography of Mount Hooker was reduced to a dizzying web of contour lines. But beneath the professional urgency, a current of pessimism ran deep. Everyone there knew the odds. The Wind River Range could swallow people whole, leaving not so much as a shoelace behind. The first flights began that afternoon, a helicopter's rotors beating a rhythmic thud against the vast mountain silence. From the air, the scale of the challenge was breathtakingly clear. The spotters inside scanned the endless gray and white expanse, looking for a flash of color, a jacket, a tent, a piece of gear, anything that didn't belong. They saw nothing. By the second day, the search had intensified, but the mountain remained silent. Ground teams, composed of highly fit SAR members, hiked the established trails, shouting Garrett's and Della's names into the wind. Their calls swallowed by the immensity of the canyons, they found nothing. Then the weather turned. The crisp blue sky of early autumn bruised to a dark, ominous gray. The temperature plummeted, and a biting wind began to howl down from the high peaks. What started as a cold rain quickly turned to sleet, then snow. The storm, arriving a few weeks earlier than usual, was a brutal physical blow to the search effort. The helicopter was grounded indefinitely, and the treacherous, slick rock became a death trap for the ground teams. The SAR commander was forced to make the difficult decision to pull them back. The official search was paralyzed. As the official effort stalled, an unofficial one began. Garrett's old climbing partner, Alistair Finch, a wiry man with the quiet intensity of someone who has spent a lifetime in serious environments, arrived at the command post. He knew, as the officials did, that standard search protocols might not be enough. Garrett was an artist on rock, known to be drawn to obscure, challenging lines that wouldn't appear in any guidebook. Alistair made a few calls, and within a day, a small, elite group of local climbers had assembled. They were not SAR certified, but they were experts in this specific terrain, bringing their own ropes, their own gear, and an intimate, intuitive knowledge of the mountain that no map could provide. While the official teams had focused on the probable, Alistair's group focused on the improbable. For days, they pushed themselves to the limits, climbing in the biting cold, their hope dwindling with each empty ledge and silent cliff face. They too found nothing. Not a single carabiner, not a shred of rope, not a footprint. After 10 days, the official announcement came. With no new leads and with winter conditions rapidly setting in, the full-scale search operation was suspended. The mountain had won. The case of Garrett and Dela Beckwith, once a frantic rescue operation, now settled into the cold, quiet stillness of a long-term missing persons file. The wilderness had reclaimed its silence, leaving behind only the haunting, inexplicable image of 2 satellite phones sitting fully charged in the glove compartment of a dusty green truck. The years that followed the suspension of the search did not pass gently. They moved with a slow, grinding friction, eroding hope and calcifying grief. For Marianne Beckwith, time became a flat circle. Each day a repetition of the one before, anchored to the same profound absence. The house in Lander, once filled with the vibrant energy of her daughter and the steady presence of her husband, became a quiet, meticulously preserved museum of a life that had abruptly stopped. Della's room remained untouched, her posters on the wall, a stack of books on her nightstand. Garrett's workshop in the garage was a silent testament to his orderly mind. To move anything felt like a betrayal, an admission that they were never coming back, a concession Marianne was not yet willing to make. She was trapped in a state of suspended grief, a limbo from which there was no escape because there was no finality. In the wider community, the story of the Beckwiths slowly transitioned from a raw, immediate tragedy into a piece of local folklore. A cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered at trailheads and in climbing shops. The initial flood of casseroles and condolence calls to Marianne's home had dwindled to a trickle, then to a respectful, knowing silence from neighbors who no longer knew what to say. The official case file, thick with search grids and interview transcripts, was moved from an active investigation drawer to a cold case cabinet at the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. It sat there, a testament to a mystery that had resisted every effort to solve it. Then, 3 years after the disappearance, in the summer of 2016, a flicker of possibility broke the stillness. A backpacker found a small hexagonal piece of aluminum, climbing nut, in the shallow water of a remote alpine creek several miles southeast of Mount Hooker. It was a high-end piece of gear, weathered but still solid. The hiker, an experienced outdoorsman himself, knew about the Beckwith case. He brought the piece of gear to the sheriff's office. The discovery briefly resuscitated the investigation. The local news ran a short segment, and for a few days, it felt like 2013 again. But hope, however, is a fragile thing. A detective's follow-up revealed the frustrating ambiguity of the clue. While the brand of the climbing nut was one Garrett favored, it was also popular among other serious climbers. There was no serial number, no unique marking, and its location was problematic miles from any logical ascent or descent route. It could have been washed downstream for 3 years, or it could have been dropped by another climber entirely. The brief glimmer of hope for Marianne was extinguished, leaving the darkness that followed feel even deeper. 2 more years passed. The case sank back into obscurity until it was resurrected in the most unexpected of places. A niche, text-based online climbing forum. An anonymous user posted a baseless accusation, speculating that Garrett, facing financial ruin, had staged his and his daughter's disappearance to escape his debts. The rumor, born in the dark corners of the internet, spread to a local Wyoming blogger, who wrote a sensationalist post about it. For Marianne, it was a profound violation. The suggestion that Garrett could have been responsible for their fate, that he could have harmed Della, was a cruelty she could barely comprehend. The public nature of the rumor, however unfounded, forced the hand of the cold case unit. A detective was once again assigned to pull the Beckwith file. He spent a week meticulously reviewing Garrett's life, a task that felt like an intrusion into the private world of a dead man. The financial picture that emerged was not one of desperation. The business was solvent, the loan payments current. The rumor was officially debunked, but the damage was done. The Beckwith case was now colder than ever, a file of negations. A story defined by what it wasn't. There was no evidence of foul play, no evidence of a staged disappearance, and no evidence of a simple accident. The investigation was officially inactive, a ghost in the Sheriff's Department archives. The vast, silent expanse of the Wind River Range held its secrets, and the mystery remained anchored to that one maddening, inexplicable fact. 2 climbers had gone to face a deadly mountain and had left their only hope of rescue sitting fully charged in the glove compartment of their truck. 11 years is a long time. It's long enough for granite to be scoured by wind and ice, for memories to soften and blur, and for a cold case to be buried under the weight of 1,000 new ones. In the late summer of 2024, Mount Hooker remained as impassive and monumental as ever. Its secrets held tight within its stony heart. But the mountain wasn't done with their story yet. Chloe Vance and Ben Carter were a new generation of climbers, armed with ultralight gear and an appetite for pushing boundaries. Their goal on this trip was to establish a new line, a sheer, intimidating wall on a lesser-trafficked aspect of Mount Hooker. For 2 days, they had been immersed in the vertical world, their lives reduced to a rhythm of movement and stillness. By late afternoon, on their 3rd day, they were physically spent and looking for a place to set up their portable camp for the night. It was Ben who saw it first. He was leading the pitch, his body pressed against the cold granite, when he paused, squinting. About 50 feet to his left, and slightly above him, was a glint of metal, a bolt hanger. Rusted but unmistakable, drilled into the rock. It was old. He called down to Chloe, his voice slightly muffled by the wind. It made no sense. This face was supposed to be virgin territory. He'd researched it for months, and there were no records of any previous attempts. Ben kept climbing, and a few minutes later he called down again. He'd found another one, and another. They formed a clear line, a traverse leading toward a small shadowed alcove, a slight indentation in the massive wall. It looked more like an escape route, a place someone might go to get out of a storm. Curiosity, a powerful force in people who willingly climbed thousands of feet up sheer rock, began to override their exhaustion. The bivouac spot that was already equipped with anchors was a gift, saving them hours of difficult drilling. They decided to investigate. As they neared the alcove, the object of the traverse came into view. Suspended from a complex web of aging straps and anchored to the rock was a portaledge. It hung there like a derelict ghost ship, its gray fabric faded and stained, flapping softly in the wind. A wave of profound unease washed over Chloe. This wasn't just an old camp. It felt like a shrine, a place frozen in time. The portaledge was a time capsule. A blue dry bag, its plastic brittle and cracked, sat huddled against the rock wall. Next to it, a coil of climbing rope lay in a perfect neat circle, though it was stiff and faded. And next to the rope was a sleeping bag. It was a deep, dusty red, and it was zipped almost all the way to the top. The scene was profoundly eerie. There was a sense of order to it, a deliberateness that was at odds with the idea of simple abandonment. An unspoken question hung in the air between them. Where were the people who owned this gear? Chloe felt a strange compulsion, a need to understand what she was looking at. She unclipped from the anchor and carefully lowered herself onto the edge of the portaledge. The fabric groaned under her, but the frame held. The air on the ledge was still, shielded from the wind, and it felt heavy, stagnant. Her gaze shifted to the red sleeping bag. It was the centerpiece of the tableau, the object that held the most pressing mystery. She could see a small lump at the top where a pillow might be. She hesitated, a prickle of fear running up her spine. Ben watched her, his expression tense. Taking a deep breath, Chloe reached for the zipper. It was stiff, corroded by years of moisture and ice. She had to work it back and forth, the grating sound unnaturally loud in the mountain silence. It moved an inch, then another. She saw clothes first, a bundled-up fleece jacket. Then, as the opening widened, she saw something beneath it. It was pale, almost white, and had a smooth, curved shape. For a surreal moment, her brain refused to process it. Then the zipper gave way another few inches, and the object rolled slightly to the side. Two dark, empty sockets stared up at the sky. A choked gasp escaped Chloe's lips. She scrambled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a skull. She was looking at a human skull, resting on a pillow of clothes inside a sleeping bag. On a forgotten ledge, thousands of feet up a cliff face. Ben, seeing her reaction, moved to the edge, peered down, his face paling. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words snatched away by the wind. They stared in horrified silence. The full reality of the scene crashed down on them. This wasn't a camp. It was a tomb, a vertical grave suspended in the sky for years. Inside that faded red bag was a complete human skeleton. Shock gave way to a cold, clear-headed sense of purpose. They knew they couldn't touch anything else. This was a crime scene, or at the very least, a scene of a death that needed to be investigated. Chloe pulled out her phone, her hands shaking, but she forced herself to be methodical. She took photos from every possible angle, capturing the portaledge, the gear, the sleeping bag, the wider context of the cliff face. Ben checked his own device, finding the GPS coordinates. There was no cell service. They were completely alone with their discovery. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of the sunset felt like a cruel joke. They made the difficult decision to start the long technical descent in the fading light. It was a full 24 hours later, after a sleepless night and a grueling final descent, that they finally stumbled out of the forest and into the big sandy trailhead parking lot. Chloe found a single bar of cell service. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed 911, her voice cracking as she spoke the words that would finally, after 11 years of silence, reopen the cold, forgotten case of the Beckwiths. "We're at Mount Hooker," she said. "We found something. Found a body." Call from Chloe Vance sent a jolt through the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. A discovery on Mount Hooker, a body on a portaledge, was a scenario so specific and so strange that it immediately pulled the oldest and coldest case from the archives. The Beckwith file, thick with the dust of 11 years, was laid open on the desk of Detective Isabella Rossi. Rossi, new to the cold case unit, was a sharp, tech-savvy investigator who had built a reputation for seeing old evidence with fresh eyes. She was 28 years old, meaning she had been a teenager herself when Garrett and Della had vanished. As she read through the initial reports from 2013, the details felt like echoes from another era. Now a ghost from that past had reappeared, suspended thousands of feet in the air. The first challenge was immediate and immense: the location. This wasn't a crime scene that could be cordoned off with yellow tape. It was a vertical crime scene, a logistical nightmare accessible only to a handful of people in the world. Rossi assembled a specialized team, including a forensic anthropologist and 2 members of the elite Jenny Lake search and rescue team, who were among the best high-altitude recovery specialists in the country. The operation began 2 days later under a clear, unforgiving sky. The recovery itself was a painstaking, multi-day process. The 2 SAR climbers were the first on the wall, establishing a new, secure set of ropes and anchors above the site. Every action was relayed via radio to Detective Rossi and Dr. Thorne, the forensic anthropologists who were observing from a temporary base camp hundreds of feet below. The first set of clues came from the inventory of the gear. The brand names and models of the carabiners, the cams, and the ropes were meticulously logged. A quick cross-reference with the 2013 case file confirmed it. This was the equipment of Garrett and Della Beckwith. One item was conspicuously absent: Garrett's personal climbing harness. Della's was there, but his was gone. It was a significant detail, suggesting he had left the ledge wearing it. Next, they turned their attention to the red sleeping bag. The climbers noted something that Chloe and Ben had missed in their shock. The bag was not just lying on the platform. It was deliberately and securely fastened to the portaledge frame with 2 short lengths of accessory cord tied with a climber S-knot. This was a conscious act, an act of care, of preservation, designed to ensure the sleeping bag and its occupant would not be dislodged by the ferocious winds that regularly swept the cliff face. With documentation complete, the most delicate phase began: the recovery of the remains. The skeleton, bleached clean by 11 years of sun and wind, was incredibly fragile. The climbers carefully cut the webbing, securing the sleeping bag, then gently maneuvered the entire bag into a specialized, rigid recovery container. Back in the controlled environment of the State Crime Lab, the investigation continued. The focus turned to the remains. Dental records were flown in from the Beckwith's family dentist, and within hours, Dr. Thorne had a positive identification. The skeleton found on the portaledge was that of 19-year-old Della Beckwith. As Dr. Thorne continued his work, he made the discovery that would finally provide a concrete explanation for the scene on the ledge. While examining the lower leg bones, he found it: a severe, complex fracture of the right tibia. The break was catastrophic, completely immobilizing. There was no way Della could have put any weight on that leg, let alone descended a technical rock face. She had been trapped. The evidence now painted a clear, heartbreaking picture. Della had suffered a terrible accident, a fall that shattered her leg. Garrett, her experienced father, had done everything he could. He had established a secure camp on the most protected ledge he could find. He had placed his injured daughter in the sleeping bag, secured her to the platform to keep her safe, and left her with their remaining supplies. Then, with his own harness on, he had left, presumably to undertake a desperate solo mission to get help. The scene on the portaledge was not a crime scene in the traditional sense. It was the epicenter of a tragedy. It answered the question of what had happened to Della, but in doing so, it deepened the mystery of her father. Where did Garrett go? He had walked off that ledge into the vast, unforgiving wilderness and vanished as completely as if he had stepped into the sky itself. The investigation had found one of the Beckwiths, but now it had to start a new search for the other. With the fate of Della Beckwith now understood, the focus of the investigation shifted entirely to her father. Garrett Beckwith was no longer just a missing person. He was a man with a known starting point and a desperate, tragic purpose. Detective Rossi convened a meeting with the SAR team and Alistair Finch, Garrett's old climbing partner. They stood around a massive, high-resolution topographical map, the portaledge site marked with a single red pin. The question was no longer where they were, but where one of them had gone. He would have tried the most direct route down, Alistair said, his finger tracing a series of steep gullies and ledges on the map directly below the pin. He was against the clock, Della's injury, the weather. he wouldn't have been thinking about a safe, easy descent. He would have been thinking about speed. Based on this expert insight, Rossi authorized a new, highly targeted search. For 2 days, they found nothing. The rock was clean, wiped by a decade of storms. Then, on the 3rd day, a searcher made a find. About 500 feet directly below the camp, tucked away in a narrow, water-streaked gully, found a single rust-pitted climbing anchor, a piton hammered deep into a hairline crack. It was an old-style piece of gear, the kind a climber would use only when no other form of protection was available. It matched the vintage of the gear recovered from the portaledge. A wave of excitement went through the command post. This was it. This was Garrett's path. He had been here. The piton marked his descent. Hope soared that he would be found nearby, perhaps at the base of a difficult rappel. The search team redoubled their efforts, but after another full day of combing the area, their optimism slowly drained away. The piton led nowhere. It was a single, isolated clue in a sea of granite. Beyond it, there was no other sign of his passage. It was another frustrating dead end. The official search was once again called off. The mystery of Garrett's final moments still locked away by the mountain. Months passed. The case file on Garrett Beckwith remained open but inactive. Detective Rossi had exhausted all her leads. It seemed the mountain would keep its final secret. The breakthrough, when it came, was entirely accidental. It had nothing to do with the official investigation. Several months later, a wildlife biologist from the University of Wyoming was conducting a study on the migratory patterns of bighorn sheep using a high-resolution drone. One afternoon, while piloting the drone over a rugged, bowl-shaped basin several miles east of Mount Hooker, desolate, cliff-bound area with no trails and no logical reason for a person to ever go, there a flash of unnatural color caught his eye. It was a tiny speck of faded blue against the gray and brown of the rocky terrain. He maneuvered the drone closer, and the image resolved into tattered shreds of fabric snagged on a thorny bush at the base of a high, sheer cliff. Panning the camera, he saw something else scattered among the rocks nearby. Pale white objects that looked disturbingly like bones. He knew the stories, knew about the Beckwith case. He carefully saved the drone SGPS data and flight logs, and immediately contacted the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. Detective Rossi felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. She dispatched a team, including herself and Dr. Aries Thorne, via helicopter, to the coordinates. The moment their boots hit the ground, they knew the basin was a natural trap. Surrounded on 3 sides by unclimbable cliffs, the scene was grim. 11 years of harsh weather and animal activity had taken their toll. The remains were scattered, fragmented. Dr. Thorne began the slow, somber work of recovery. For a moment, it seemed that a definitive link might elude them, leaving Garrett's fate in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Then, a member of the recovery team, sifting through the soil near where the largest bone fragments were found, saw a glint of metal. It wasn't climbing gear. He carefully brushed away the dirt to reveal a small, uniquely shaped titanium plate, the kind used in maxillofacial surgery. It was bent and scratched, but intact. Detective Rossi felt her heart quicken. She remembered a detail from her initial review of the case file, a line in Marianne Beckwith's original interview. She had mentioned that Garrett had shattered his jaw in a cycling accident about 15 years prior and had required extensive surgery. Rossi made a call. The next afternoon, the confirmation came. The plate found in the remote basin was a perfect match. There was no doubt. After 11 years, Garrett Beckwith had been found. His final resting place was not at the bottom of a climbing route, but miles away at the base of a cliff he had likely never intended to be on. The location told the final tragic chapter of his story. He hadn't just fallen, he had become profoundly lost. In his desperate high-stakes race against time, likely disoriented by injury, weather, or darkness, he had strayed far from the logical descent path, ending up in a part of the wilderness from which there was no escape. His final moments were not a calculated risk, but a fatal error born of desperation and love. The discovery of Garrett Beckwith's remains brought the long, agonizing search to a close, but it did not bring simple closure. Instead, it offered a theory pieced together from fractured bones, a rusted piton, and the silent testimony of a vertical grave. The official conclusion, entered into the final report by Detective Isabella Rossi, was one of cascading tragedies, a story of love and desperation played out on a stage of unforgiving granite. The prevailing theory, accepted by the investigators and by Marianne Beckwith herself, was as logical as it was heartbreaking. The story began with a misstep on the rock, a moment of misfortune that resulted in Della's severe leg fracture. From that instant, their ambitious climbing adventure transformed into a desperate fight for survival. Garrett, the meticulous planner, did everything right. He established a secure camp on the portaledge, a fortress against the elements. He stabilized his daughter's injury as best he could, placed her in the sleeping bag to protect her from the biting wind and cold, and consciously secured her to the platform, an act of a father ensuring his child would be safe while he was gone. He left her with their supplies, a small comfort in an impossible situation. Then, wearing his harness and taking only the most essential gear, he embarked on a solo mission for help, a descent he knew was fraught with peril. But somewhere in the treacherous gullies and ledges below, something went wrong. Perhaps it was the encroaching storm that had thwarted the initial search, a sudden whiteout that erased the landscape and his sense of direction. Or perhaps it was simply the immense disorienting scale of the wilderness. Lost and likely hypothermic, he had wandered miles off course, ending up in the inescapable basin where he ultimately succumbed to a final fatal fall. Miles away, on the cliff face, Della waited. She would have watched the clouds roll in, her hope dwindling with the fading light until she too succumbed to her injuries in the relentless cold. It was a story without villains, a perfect storm of bad luck and the brutal indifference of nature. Yet even with this narrative, one question remained, hanging in the air like an unresolved chord. It was the question that had haunted the case from the very first day, the detail that elevated it from a simple tragedy to a profound mystery. Why were the satellite phones left in the truck? Was the central, inexplicable flaw in an otherwise logical chain of events? Had it been a simple human oversight, a moment of overconfidence from an expert climber who believed he had transcended the need for such precautions on a familiar mountain? Or had they been intentionally left behind for a reason that would forever remain unknown? That single, seemingly minor decision, made in the quiet of the trailhead parking lot 11 years earlier, was the fatal pivot point. It was the mistake that had removed any chance of a different outcome. The silent error that had set in motion a chain of events from which there was no recovery. The answer to that question was buried with Garrett and Della, leaving an unfillable hole in the center of the story. For Marianne Beckwith, the final discoveries brought a brutal kind of peace. The limbo of not knowing, a unique and torturous form of grief, was over. She was now a widow and a mother who had lost her only child. But she was no longer the wife and mother of the missing. She could finally bring Garrett and Della home. A small private service was held. She buried the remains of her daughter and the fragmented, recovered pieces of her husband side by side. The story had an ending, even if it was incomplete. This story, like so many others, lost to the wild, reminds us of the mountain's ultimate power. It doesn't care about our plans, our promises, or our love for one another. It simply waits, holding its secrets in silent, stony indifference. The tragic tale of Garrett and Della Beckwith is a testament to a father's love and a daughter's dream, a story that finally found its ending, even if the most haunting question was never answered. What would you have done if you had been in Garrett's shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with a friend. And forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the world's most baffling mysteries. Thank you for watching.